I always tell my guests, let's zhuzh our hair first. Let's floof off our hair.
That's important. Okay.
Hello, everyone. This is Chaweon, and I am super honored to have this guest with me today, this lovely lady. She is somebody who's so well known in the magic community, and if you are serious at all about tarot, you have probably come across her blog, Tarotflections. It's one of the preeminent blogs about tarot, and I know that when I was Googling stuff about tarot, her blog came up a lot. If you talk to anybody who is into tarot, like seriously into it, not like just doing it once in a while, but like really studies it, they will always bring up, oh, you should definitely take a class with Camelia Elias. And I finally did a couple months ago, and I have to say that her class was absolutely amazing, and I feel like she has so many things to teach, especially new witches, about how important it is to do divination, and also not just for witches, but just for anyone in general, how to take something symbolic, apply it to your life, and use it in a way that's practical, because everything in this world is just symbols that our minds can find meaning in, and that meaning that we put into it is what creates our lives. I am, again, so thrilled to have Camelia with me. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for this invite, and thank you for taking my class in playing cards.
When I first looked into tarot, where I didn't know much about it, I just thought it was just looking at a bunch of pictures and finding the meaning in a book. And being like, oh, this card means this, and that card means that. And then I'd just be like, when my friends would try it, before I learned from you, they would give me these weird, like very rigid meanings. And then I'd just be like, this doesn't apply to me at all. But what you're talking about seems to be more than that.
Actually, my field is in American studies, and I got tenured for my work in Jewish American literature, of all things. So, I ended up with my second doctorate in creative writing and epistemologies of creative writing. How do you write? How do you approach the very idea of the creative? And my colleagues, they say, nobody ever teaches a tenured professorship. How can you do that, so that you can become a fortune teller? I mean, you can imagine the laughs, right? I hope that the last laugh is on me. I don't know. I'm still in the process of paying attention to what's happening right now. So, So I changed lanes entirely, and then I went. I don't want to say I started a new thing, because while I was with the university, what I was interested in always was simple questions. Like, what is the premise for anything that we think about? So I did some research into using the tarot as a cultural text. And by that, I simply mean to say that I was fascinated by why a tarot pack, especially the 22 trumps, have been so many times reproduced and disseminated throughout our culture. There is just about no manifestation of our earthly life that doesn't have some kind of representation in the tarot. So we have things like the housewives tarot, the baseball tarot, the Dracula tarot, you name it, you name the phenomena, and it's very unlikely that you will not find the tarot representing that particular phenomena. So part of my research at the university at that time was simply to look into what it was that made so many people interested in finding their own agendas mirrored in these cards.
What'd you find?
So, well, I found that particularly the so-called marginalized groups, they found the tarot as a kind of an outlet for investigating into the notion of the self. Who am I? The tarot, let us not forget, became very popular in the 60s when the women became to be very interested in the question of the self, Oh, okay, so I have been a wife, and I'm a mother, and I have been a housewife, but I don't really have a sense of self. So a lot of research into feminism has been done around the 60s, and well, what I found was that it was comforting. put it that way. It was comforting for a while to realize that when you play with the tarot cards, and that I would emphasize that notion of play, that every time you lay down 3 cards, you will have a new story about the self, about your environment, about what is to come if you are interested in doing predictive readings, about your world. I found that it was very easy for people to simply just see themselves as going through embodied functions. In this case, let's just talk about the women of the 50s. Yeah, indeed, the 50s housewives, and then the 60s, when they got to be emancipated or liberated. We use all those words. So you lay down 3 cards, and then all of a sudden you have a narrative where, you can see yourself as embodying the function of the leader. You have the archetypes, the grand so-called archetypes. You have the emperor, the empress. You have the star. You have empress. So these are strong forces that a lot of women start to identify with. And I can totally see the fascination in that, because after all, we recognize these types from our daily dealings in life. We all know a boss type. We all know a nurturing so-called type of mother. We all know the type of the giver. If we talk about the star, or the temperance, the one who's always diplomatic, trying to smooth out relations, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine taking a woman who has no sense of self, sitting there with a pack of cards, and realizing that every time she would lay down 3 cards, that she would have a completely different configuration based on all these random permutations. So before you know it, it's like, whoa, I want to know more about this. So it's a fun game. It's a fun game of projection, obviously, because that's what we're dealing with always. That's where my Zen comes in. And when we start talking about Zen, I'm not a nice person.
I like that when you're not nice, though.
For all this talk, if you ask me at the meta level of discourse, in other words, just positioning myself at some kind of distance from what I'm observing or what I'm investigating into, that's one thing, so I can say this is so fascinating. But if I have to involve myself in what I'm doing, and I think that much of my teaching actually comes from this other position, which is very much Zen informed, Yeah. But the first thing that goes is like identity. That's my biggest enemy. Self. I don't know if this microphone can actually record my very nasty sounds, the slashing. Yeah. So I'm Xing all of this out. So in that sense, maybe to make a point here, I'm not your regular fortune teller, indeed.
Oh, that's an understatement. Yeah.
Like the tarot cards, it's a popular thing, a popular tool for all those who have struggled to find a foothold, in the, like, how can I, the basic question there is, how can I get recognized? Can somebody give me some recognition today? Thank you. If we have to get a slightly more sophisticated, and this is the point that interests me in my work with the cards, is when I look at the narratives that emerge out of a 3-card layout or a 10-card or a whole grand tableau or whatever. When you have all the cards on the table, what interests me is this. How can I look at these cards and try not to think about anything, try and leave all that, concern and soul anguish and desires, I need to be somebody, I need recognition. If I put all that aside, and if I try not to cling to any kind of conceptual framework, what might I come up with? The stuff that I then end up relating to, because I'm already making a very conscious move towards detachment. When I look at what is happening, I try to recognize, or at least identify the situation, what is happening. Then I try to recognize, what I see is the case, using these visual cues that we have. After all, we're dealing with visual artists. Designing these decks, what is the case according to these people's design? And we can talk about esoteric design, intentional design, whatever. I don't really give a shit about that. So what I'm interested in is, what do I see? What do I see? Whether it has any meaning or not, I don't care. What do I see? And how does that relate to what I would like to see, or how I am in denial about seeing? See what I mean? So there are a couple of moves that I'm trying to push when I look at the cards. So just what do I see when my seeing, or I'm trying to make a move for my seeing not to be informed by any cultural preconditioning or any other type of preconditioning. So that's already pretty advanced. How do you see? Can you see these images without all that? And the next step that I always go for is I try to investigate into the premise for my own question, if it's my question that I bring to the cards, or else if I read for other people's, I try to really listen to that. What are they saying? What are they really saying? even between the lines, people say a lot of things, and then I start detecting, what they're really saying is something entirely different. This can be both conscious and unconscious, which is what makes my work with the cards very exciting, because every time I have to go in there with this kind of hearing, like, what am I really hearing? So I'm trying to be very present there in the moment of reading the cards, whether it's for myself or for others. What am I hearing? What is the premise for this question? Is there any implicit or underlying structure to what people are talking about or putting on my table in the form of a question? And the third that I always use in my own practice is to also, after I do these preliminary observations, to ask myself, now, what is the premise for what I am saying, in the sense of, if I can get if I can arrive at some commonsensical conclusion, that can synthesize, these pieces of information that I receive, in other words, how can I process this information so that I turn it into some kind of knowledge that the other can receive from me and use? Then I have to think about how I put it, how do I put it? What kind of words do I use? What is the premise for that kind of formulation, for my relaying a particular sentence or whatever you want to call message? Let's call it a message, right? So, then the next thing that I do that I find fascinating in this work, that's not just doing cultural studies, again, is checking with my own fearlessness. That is actually one of the things that I always try to teach everyone who takes my class. How fearless are you? In other words, how free are you? How free are you from the anxiety that you may experience that, oh my God, I sit here with 3 cards and I have no idea where, I can't make any sense of them, but lo and behold, thank you for the books filled with random meanings, then I can just look it up and give it a go. So if you don't resort to any such books, how fearless are you? How confident are you that you can sit with these visual images and given their history, they are so clear actually, and that's what I love about this. They are at least the 22 trumps, that we have added on top of the regular playing cards pack. There is the clarity of different figures embodying different functions. Yeah. So, when you talk about addressing symbolism throughout the day, you're right that there is nothing in the world that does not already belong to the so-called symbolic order of things. I get up in the morning and, like you said, let's do our hair. So how do I look? By the way, I hope I look good. I'm 50 soon, so I don't know who the hell is gonna be interested. 50-year-old hag. But let's pretend. So you see, there you have. So we can pretend. We can do all sorts of things that are utterly symbolic. I get up in the morning, I look at myself in the mirror, I put a little lipstick, I do something, and here I am ready to conquer the world. That's a purely symbolical act. So we cannot bypass the day-to-day life symbolism, but once we know that in effect, all these stylizations that we resort to, they can be bodily or conceptual, they have no inherent existence. And in other words, they mean zero. They mean nothing. So, in a way, we go through life operating with a lot of nothing that we, however, assign a whole lot of meaning to. It's all fine. It gets us through life. But at the end of the day, how much belief do we invest in these symbolic acts? So see, this is the crucial question that interests me. So when I say check with your fearlessness, after you identify what's happening in the cards and you try to investigate into the premise for the question, whether yours or another's, you investigate into the premise for your own formulations for what you need to say. How fearless are you? How much clinging do you do to your own conceptual framework? So if I decide with myself that today I'm free, I am detached, or I don't know, maybe I don't know what detachment really is, but at least that knowledge, that I bring to the table, that none of this means anything, it saves me. Yeah. So that is exactly what enables me then to come up with what I like to believe is a crystal clear answer. What I find fascinating about this work with the cards is the fact that they give us the possibility to embody, in a way, that form of clarity that comes out of bringing yourself to the table and being present to listening to the other, what's going on, what is the issue that we need to address, and then, kicking into that so-called intuition, which for me is utter clarity, so that we can arrive to a sentence or a judgment of the situation that is precisely not involved. In other words, it has zero of my baggage, zero content that comes from my own cultural field, cognitive field, deconstructive field, whatever, the Zen field, whatever field, semiotic field. If I can determine that I bring none of that into my reading into my clarity, that is to say, it's not so much about the reading of the cards, because obviously I will make recourse to all of these competencies when I try to decode something. But at the end of the day, the clarity that I develop, I want that to be like crystal clear, You realize that there is no inherent substance to anything at all, then the next thing that happens is that you can allow yourself in a completely relaxed way to ask the other question. So, okay, nothing has existence, inherent existence. Nothing has substance. This is also an idea supported by quantum physics and the science world. So it's not anything new I'm inventing here. So nothing has substance. Then you can be relaxed in posing the next question, or at least that's the one I like to pose. It's like, okay, so then what is the purpose of anything? This desire that I have to understand how I can still enjoy narratives, even the narratives of the self that I don't have any beliefs about. In that sense, like I'm so free, thank you, God. How can I still enjoy all these narratives about the self and all that, while I never believe in all that? And, I came to the conclusion that I can enjoy all this because I maintain a very sober distance between the stuff that I see happening right under my eyes, and then my realization, my constant realization. Actually, it's a practice. Some would say it's a tantric practice. The constant realization that you impose on yourself, almost in case you should forget, that nothing has substance, therefore there is no point in clinging to anything. There is no point even in asking that question of what is the purpose of this and that. Nothing. There is no purpose of anything. Read the cards, or you try to internalize some of the ideas that come at you that precisely have the potential to destabilize completely your habitual patterns of thinking. Then you see the value in that, So there you have it. So, I read the tarot, and so I do more quasi-academic research into it because, I kind of got used to it and I can't help it. So I'm interested in a lot of history and all that, but I don't, in my own reading practice of the cards, I don't care about history. I just care about how we can simply just look and then pay attention to what arises so that we can finally come to the conclusion that, aha, there is something here that completely knocks off my habitual pattern of thinking. So that's the now I just got my whole philosophy of reading the cards that I have in a way. Maybe I didn't used to be so clear, or I don't know, maybe to some here it comes across as so convoluted. But this is where I come from. Impressionable. Maybe you don't want to be open to what the person to the left says, what the person to the right says. Oh, this one says this and the other one says that, and then you sit there all the time and you're like, when we talk about looking at the cards, there is also the other thing that you still need to kick in some kind of awareness of a particular type of method